So for today's video, I've got a P38 engagement that I did as my friend was coming over to play on the sim. I'm hoping to upload that video soon, but as a warm-up to him coming over to kind of help me get my instructor hat on, so to be, I decided to go ahead and do a real quick engagement. Not really expecting anything special from it. I recorded the recording track in IL2, but I didn't record the actual studio OBS recording setup because, like I said, it was just a warm-up flight. But it turned out I ended up in this really cool situation. I got one air-to-air kill with bombs on the aircraft still and re-engaged the engagement, got up to altitude, got over the engagement, found another target that I could kill, and then ended up taking a hit into the port engine and had an engine fire, and I executed, brilliantly executed, dive out fire. So I'll get more into what exactly that is in the video, but it's a really cool technique that is really good to know, especially when you're flying planes that either aren't equipped with fire extinguishers, or in cases where the fire extinguishers in the engine cowling have already been used or damaged, or if you're in a position where the fire is somewhere where the fire extinguishers aren't, for instance in the middle of a wing spar emanating from a fuel tank, for instance. It was a really cool little bit of flying, and I'm really proud of myself for getting the ship back in one piece. Well, mostly one piece. And getting it down on the runway afterwards. So here's that. And here we are once again with some IL2. First thing that we're looking at here is Nick's beautiful P37, Deacon Dandy, the X51 on the side. He picked out an awesome airplane for himself. So if you don't know what I'm referencing, my friend Nick came over to fly with me. I'm going to be posting this video before that one because it's going to need a lot more editing and things. Before he came over, I had an awesome flight in a P38. It encompassed some really cool tactics and also a dive out fire. So one of the things you can do when you're hit is dive out a fire if you go over about 300, 350 miles an hour. And anecdotally, I've read a lot about this procedure. I've done it in some other simulators. This is my first time getting to do it in this one. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and get into it. So here's my view. And so this is just taking complete restock of what I was doing. And here's my P38 California. You'll notice the first thing that I did was kind of break off to the side a little bit. I don't think I noticed that guy, but what I did notice is I saw a P51. At this point I had no idea where my enemies were, but I saw that P51 and I knew that he knew where the enemy was. So I decided to go ahead and just follow him. So you can see this here, me following the P51 around. At this point I get a nice overview of the fight and what's going on here, and I start to try and figure out logically who might be a target, who might be a friendly. P51s and Messerschmitts don't look that different from a distance. The platform of the wings, there's some slight changes here. I got off some snapshots and someone wasn't flying very smoothly, so I wasn't stable gun platform. You can see me bouncing around right there. Coming around, just trying to make sure not to get bounced by any of these guys. In a second, I should be locking on to someone. And I was like, hey, there's someone on my tail. So then I end up in a good roll defense here, trying to stay out of planes. So it's very critical when you're defending that you don't want to let their wings line up with theirs, because that's when you can pull for a good gunnery pass. So if he rotates and you're 90 degrees or even more from him, you follow through that spiral, and as you pull, you get off axis from them. And then if you're lucky, you scoot forward in front of you like this. And part of good pursuit is recognizing when someone's defending, either with a roll defense, like you just saw, roll with scissors, or a straight scissor fight, horizontal scissors fight, and reacting to that and not letting it happen. But unfortunately, it's the AI. Here I'm pulling some lead, getting some shots off. I don't think any of these shots really go anywhere. There it is. Padlock right now from the outside. And all these other aircraft flying around I had no idea about. And there was me taking his right wingtip off. I kind of followed for a little bit to make sure I saw his canopy come off, and then that was out of it. So let's go ahead and see that again. From this perspective, I'll move a little bit further back. There we go. So you can see here I'm fully beat up on him. I believe someone else tagged him in the right wingtip too. Yeah, that was that P38 going by right there. And then I hit him again in the same exact spot. It was enough to weaken the structure enough for that wingtip to come off. And there you go, see canopy come off. At this point I'm like, okay, where's my next target? What's going on next? Looking around. You see me looking around in this view. This probably followed my head to something. Keep in mind I'm doing all this dogfighting with, 4,000 pounds of bombs on the airplane, and that was really what I wanted to test with this flight, was put myself in a position where I would have to do some dogfighting with armaments on the airplane to see how it works. Normally, for most World War II aircraft, this is a no-go. This is not something that you can do. So here I am now. I thought I got hit from an enemy airplane that got up my tail. I just saw some tracers go by from the train down in that village, and I'm wondering if that got me. So at some point here, I was looking to re-engage. I think I did manage to re-engage. So yeah, I got my engines set now for emergency power. Everything's full go. This is from my perspective again. You can see I'm looking around at maintaining my climb speed, and I'm just trying to find the engagement again. So I've already killed one target. I'd like to kill more. Keeping an eye out for other airplanes. And then I can see this guy over here. And I was like, hey, what's up with him? And I know there's still a fairly good fight somewhere to be had. I don't know if this recording catches all the AI radio traffic. And to be honest, if it doesn't, that'll be a blessing in disguise because they are quite chatty. And I haven't really gotten to the point where their call-outs really help me that much. So here, I'm kind of catching some more things, and now I can see that P38 chasing that airplane. That's a pretty good indication to me that that high guy is an enemy airplane. There's not much that I can do about him. He's a little too high for me to be able to get up to. So I'm kind of looking at this long trail of airplanes, trying to figure out who's supporting wingmen, who's actually an enemy aircraft in a lineup trying to kill people that I can do something about. I catch this guy over here and I'm like, hey, that's a bit closer to my altitude. You can see I've got my nose down trying to catch some fighting speed in case I have to get evasive or get bounced by someone. And I'm just trying to figure out what's going on around me. Now this is my exterior view here. I should say future views. At this point I decide, hey, seems like life's going on above the clouds, punch above the clouds. See what we can catch sight of up here. And then I saw these two. If I remember correctly, this P38, if something happens to him, I saw a P38 get shot down somewhere in the scenes. I remember that being kind of startling to me. I don't think it was him. It was as whoever it was coming up out of the clouds when I see that message. Died for safety. Yeah, I lost him. There he is. Diving for safety, or is he dead? Yeah, it looks like he's pulling out. I just want to say he's down there. At this point, he's still uncommitted. Still just kind of flying around. See if there's any engagements I really like. You can see at this point I'm totally lost. I have no idea what the fight is. I'm just looking for movement at this point. Looks like I managed to catch sight of some people off the left. Like now? Yeah, there's a big number of airplanes, so let's go ahead and go. And I've got the altitude advantage now. See, I was patient. I didn't rush into a fight when everything was above me. Bombs on the airplane. This plane handles fantastically at high dynamic pressures. And I can get to those high dynamic pressures with bombs in the aircraft, putting the nose down very quickly. My weight drag, just my weight vector, excuse me, and slides forward. There's a lot to fight that drag lever. Really overcomes it. So my downward vertical speed board was very, very, very good. So I was very patient, made sure. That is a parachute. I thought that was a glitched out plane for a second. That was something taking a longer time. At this point, I see another 38. But anyway, as long as I'm above them and can dive down to at least airspeed to flight at, I know that I'm probably alright. I'm going to start keeping an eye out behind me. Somewhere in here, I pick up a trailer. I didn't realize it until it was too late. Yeah, I've got all these airplanes fighting. I'm pretty sure I'm aware of that. Oh, no, I've locked onto something. Now I'm going to try and bounce them. Meanwhile, is someone already slotted in at my tail? There he is. Didn't know he was back there. So I've got my trigger pulls going on my guy. This guy's coming around, Again, I'm unaware of his presence. It doesn't make him any less lethal. Boom. Solid hit. Starts to fire. I'm immediately saying, dude, I'm on fire. Deal with that. At this point, I'm in my engine settings saying I need to dive this airplane for all it is worth. Bombs coming off. Diving straight down to get that required 350 odd miles an hour and put that fire out. Once the fire's out. Oh, back to recovery. And now I can think about getting home. You can see the mess my bombs make. So let's go ahead and go back to the start of that situation. I'll only take a couple extra minutes here. So this is around the point where I was above that fight. I was deciding on who I was going to recommit. There's that parachute. I think that's that P38 that got shot down that I was talking about. I do not have the radio comms. Okay, so that's good to know. Because I heard his bailout call and then I saw him bail out. And I was like, okay, there's enemy fighters over here because they just bounced it. This point, that looks like a P51. And I got on him and I was like, hey, I have an altitude advantage here. So I'm going to trade that altitude for speed and I'm in. And I had this guy. If his wingmate hadn't slotted in, I would have eventually killed him. But that's good group tactics on their part to get the wingman involved. That's what you do. Steady gun platform, trying to calm down my movements on the stick. And it's smooth. Very important at this point that you're not fully in sudden jerky movements. You want all your movements to get nice and smooth and steady out. Kind of just, yeah, just like this. You see how when I pull the trigger, everything steadies out so that when I leave a nice solid unbroken non-jinky whip of bullets that extends outward from the pip and down my line that the bullets are traveling on the arm. Once you're on a nice boom, there we go. At this point, I'm ready to let go. I don't know where he is, but I know down is probably the place to be. At this point, the engine stopped on its own, I think, but then I got over into the engine controls. I don't know if you can see him on the left here, but the minute you'll see the mixture and things start to come back on that left engine. Get those bombs out, they're not going to be where they used to be anymore. Well, I still have not dealt with the mixture. I thought I got on that much sooner than I did. Must have been after a whole hour. At some point I've got I get the props feathered as well. I was using that Bendix just to the left of the steering wheel. Find my heading home. Quick check 6 of it to just see if there's anyone still back there. Doesn't seem to be there. And now it's just, okay, here's the situation. You're in a twin engine plane. You've got one engine inoperative. There's a list of things that come with that. You've got a tactical situation that you need to exit. It's an emergency. There's that basket to deal with. Funny thing, at this point, Nick was on his way to do his first flight in IL2, and also his first flight in full task controls. He called me to figure out which apartment he needed to go to. So I'm like juggling this engine out landing. Well, at the same time, I've got my phone out, and I was trying to get it on video so I could point it out, being like, hey, guess what I'm doing right now? Come on up. And then right about this point, I just threw the phone down on the desk. Aviate, communicate, navigate. Anyway, Aviate's at the top of the list is what I'm trying to say. If you're wondering what those tracers are, there are enemy tanks just over there. Isn't that great? So that was my P38 engine out experience. Because of the fact that I never really clarified it in the video as I wrapped up here, I just wanted to clarify what the procedure for this actually is. I didn't actually execute it correctly in this instance. As I've mentioned earlier in my intro, it's the first time I've had to do this in a while. So it's exactly why we review. This is one of the benefits of recording flights and going back and debriefing them. You can catch these kinds of errors. But the proper procedure is look over at the fire, establish which engine's on fire if it's an engine. If it is an engine, you want to shut that engine down by cutting the fuel mix off. Do not adjust the propeller pitch. Leave it full RPMs. Do not adjust the throttle. Just cut off the fuel mix. Once the fuel mix is off, get the plane down, nose down, and you want to dive it at an angle where you can pull out. You don't want to go straight down. You might have noticed in the video, I didn't quite go straight down because of the fact that had I gone straight down, I would have ended up in a situation where I couldn't pull out of the dive. You'll also notice, if you watch the footage carefully, I start pulling out slightly before the fire was out because of the fact that I wasn't sure if I stayed committed to that dive the way that I was, that I would have hit the ground. So that's the first thing. Just get the fuel mix off. Get the nose down. You will need over 300, 350 miles an hour, depending on the airplane and the fire, to get the fire out. Plan your dive out so that you don't smash into the ground, and be ready for a high G pull out, whatever that looks like for the airplane that you're in afterwards. Once the fire is out, get that propeller feathered if it has the ability to feather as soon as possible. It's a pretty simple procedure, but even that can get fouled up in the heat of the moment. Just a side note, historical mechanical note on why you don't want to feather the engine while the fire is burning. The reason that World War II pilots were instructed not to do that, and I trained using the materials that they used to train, to be clear. I used 1940s film reels to inform me about how to fly these airplanes. The reason that they were trained that way is because the propeller pitch is hydraulically actuated. And if there's any damage to that hydraulic system, then when you send hydraulic pressure down the line in the form of the command to change the propeller pitch, you could worsen the fire by spraying hydraulic fluid into the fire, because hydraulic fluid at the time, I guess, was flammable. And so they were trained not to touch the prop pitch or attempt to feather it until after the fire was out. But yeah, it's neat how combat flight simulation puts you into these little aviation corners. It gets you to practice these and do engine out stuff. There's so many neat corners of aviation that I would never have been challenged to step up to the plate to without combat simulation. It's one of the reasons why I consider in my aviation training and aviation knowledge good combat simulators to be as advantageous to be involved with as some of the higher end civilian simulators that are really good for instance, instrument flight rules and things like that. Things like X-Plane, things like your Microsoft flight simulators. While many people would poo-pah the physics in a simulator such as this because of the fact that it simulates damage and does all of these other things, it's advantageous for a young pilot to be exposed to these things. And in my video coming up with Nick, I'll be delving into that a little bit more with damaged wings as well. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you come back and can give me a like and a subscribe. And I hope that we're in for the long haul here.